Farbrengen this afternoon, Rebbe Zalman began that the way the Rebbe created the world, everything is because of Yidden and because of Torah. As the expression goes, Lemaise yodecha tichsoif, that the Rebbe has a desire to see Maise Yodayim, in other words, the work of Yidden. Though, who is the one that gives Yidden the koyach, that they should be able to do their Maise Yodayim? Who is the one that created their Yodayim, that they should be able to produce with their Yodayim? It is the Rebbe. And by the Rebbe we know, Lamaila we know, that ein koyach chosar poyel, which means, by the Rebbe there's no such thing that there's a distance, there's space, there's time from the strength to do something until he really does it. There's no such thing, because the Rebbe instantly he could do whatever he wishes. So Mamela, the Rebbe is the one that is giving Yidden the koyach that they should be able to do with their Maaseh Yadayim. And at the same time we say that the Rebbe has a desire, has a tichsoif. He desires and enjoys the Maaseh Yadayim, the Avodah v'Nivra. Which this is two ksavos. On one hand, we stress the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that everything is within His power and He's the one that created everything. And on the other hand, we see that He, meaning Rebbeinu Shalom, has a special desire to the Maaseh Yadayim of Yid. Which this is similar to the concept, to the quotation which is quoted very often in Chassidus, Nisava HaKadosh Baruch Hu liyos lo yizbarach dira b'tachtoina. That the Rebbe had a desire to dwell, to have a residence here, lamata b'tachtoina. What's the expression nisava? He had a desire. The expression does not say rotza. The expression does not say omar or chofetz. The expression goes nisava. He had a desire. What's the pshat nisava? So there's a famous expression from the Rebbe Rashav where he explained this quotation. He said it's like a taive, a temptation, a desire. Und auf a taive fragt man nicht kein kasche. You don't ask questions when somebody has a temptation. That's it. That's what he wants. And the Rebbe explains, it's not like there's a concept, chukoch kakti, gzeiro gazarti, vein lecha rishus laharacha, which means we know there are mitzvahs that are chukim. It's a decree from the Rebbeinu Shalom, and we say this is a decree from Hashem, and we are not permitted to look for any reasons, to have any afterthoughts about it. So there the taich is that we are excluding the concept of having any type of afterthoughts. You say, Ein lecha reshus laharacha. We are not permitted to have any thoughts. When we're talking about afatayve nishdok hakashe, it's a different concept. We say you may have kashes, could be you have questions, but we say when these questions are regarding a temptation, regarding a taiva, is nishdok hakashes. Why? Because the koyach of the taiva supersedes any and overrules any type of kash. The same thing when we're talking here about the Meibashn. So the desire which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to the Maaseh of Nivroim, in other words, the Rebbe, a special desire and a special enjoyment dwelling amongst Tachtonim. In other words, it's within our power and within our reach to create a satisfaction by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lemaise yodecha tichsof. And when we're using the concept of a dira means a residence. The Rebbe says when you apply the concept of a residence, the one who resides in the residence is totally united with the residence that he's in. The Rebbe says this is even reflected in halacha. We know that there are concepts of residences of behemoths and a residence of people, and it brings out various differences in halacha. What does this show? It shows that when one resides in a specific area, he affects the area where he resides. The same when we're talking about the Rebbe. The Rebbe has had the desire to reside, to have his residence here lamata in Welt. So this is the special rotzen which the Rebishter has to dwell here amongst Yidden, and that Yidden through their avodah should maintain that the Rebishter should have the Dira B'Tachtonim. So on one hand we say how great the Rebishter is, and on the other hand we say that he has spelled out his desire is what? The Maisi Yadayim, the whatever Yidden do. In other words, the Rebbe is, the structure of the Sikha is, the Rebbe is bringing out that we find many inyonim that unite two contrasts. For example, this inyan, we're talking about the greatness of the Rebishter, and the Rebishter is limiting himself, kaviyachol, that what is his taiva, what is his desire, what is his temptation, liyos lo yizbarech dira b'tachtoin. The same concept the Rebbe says is regarding the month of Elul. What is Elul? Ani ledoidi v'doidi li. Ani, what's the taich ani? Ani means the person, ani, he's feeling himself. He feels the existence of an ani, and we say that this ani is dedicated to whom? Ledoidi, to the Rabbeinu Shalom. Then in turn, this brings out v'doidi, that the Rabbeinu Shalom li to him. To whom? To the ani. In other words, here it's already in a double way. It goes milmaila milmato lamaila, and again back milmaila lamat. And this is the whole inyan of Elul, as it's explained by the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah, the famous mashal of Melech Besada, like a field where the king goes into the field. And when the king is in the field, it's not like when he's at his palace, but everybody has access to him. And the king greets everyone and responds to everyone, as the expression of the Alter Rebbe goes in Likutei Torah, b'sever panim yafis, very cordially, and he's responsive to all the residents of the city. Everybody has a shaykhus to him. The king himself, Chassidus tells us, there's a pasuk that a melech is mishich moiva maila gavoya mikol om. What does that mean? Simple meaning is, shechem means a shoulder. So we say that the shoulder of a king is higher than the entire nation. A head and a tzavar and a neck, that is on top of the shoulders. So if we are to explain it properly, there are moichin and there are midos. Shechem reflects the midos. Even the achorayim, the back of the person, is tied in with a shechem, is tied in with the shoulders. It does not reflect his intellect, it does not reflect his brain, his mind. Why do we say that a melech is mishich moiva maila gavoya mikol om? His shechem, his shoulder, is higher than the entire nation's cup, than the entire nation's brain. So this on one hand shows us the greatness of a melech. On the other hand, we find, again, an opposite extreme. Ein melech beloy om. You can't have a king without a nation. If he doesn't have people, he doesn't have citizens, there are no residents, he doesn't have whom to rule over. When can one be considered a king? A king is the taich when he has whom to rule over. So he has to have the he has to have the nation. Once there is a nation, he can be considered a king. So again, it shows us, on one hand, the king is be'ein aroich, much higher than the entire nation. On the other hand, he can only be a king, providing there's a nation. And here we say that what is the inyan of Chodesh Elul? Chodesh Elul is that the melech goes out basada, into the field. It's not like when he's at home in the palace, and there's not the usual procedure which is required to enter the royal palace. But everyone can greet the king, and everyone returns together with the king back into the city. So if we look into this mashal, the Rebbe says we will notice that the concept of simcha is not mentioned at all. What is mentioned is the friendliness and the friendship which the king is extending to all the residents of the city who are coming out to greet him in the field, in the Basada. However, it is not stressed that once this is accomplished, this creates a feeling of simcha amongst all participants, because after all participants are getting to greet the king. Shouldn't this create a simcha amongst them? And this the Alter Rebbe does not mention. Rebbe says we may say that perhaps, being that we're talking about Elul is not the time of Avodah B'Simcha. Elul comes as a preparation to Rosh Hashanah. And regarding Rosh Hashanah, it's brought out Vigilu Bira'oda. Gila means Simcha, joy. We are taken to rejoice on Rosh Hashanah, but what type of a rejoicing should it be? Bira'oda, a rejoicing that comes mixed in together with a shiver. In other words, it's not a regular simcha that we can compare to Mayadim l'Simcha. For example, Yontif, we know, how do we celebrate a Yontif? We celebrate a Yontif through Simcha. Amongst Mayadim l'Simcha itself, we have one of the Yomim Tovim, which is Man Simcha Seinu, which means, what is the mitzvah of this Yontif? The mitzvah of the Yontif is to be b'Simcha. However, when we Din der Eibishter, we serve Hashem, and we serve Hashem amidst Simcha, together with Simcha. So the question arises, what Avodah should be during the month of Elul? On one hand, we know it's a preparation to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is not a time of Simcha, even if, yes, it's a Simcha which is intermingled with Ra'odah, with a shiver. Re'oda, shiver, in English shiver, I don't mean shivyoi. And on the other hand, Chodesh Elul, each and every day of the month, it's weekdays, it's not days of Yomim Tovim, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Lekut Torah, that these are Vachadike Teg, every day remains a Yom Choyel. And nonetheless, he doesn't mention anything regarding Simcha, should we bring ourselves into Simcha at the time we are doing the Avodah of Elul. Here the Rebbe explained at length, explained it here and later in the Farbrengen again, referred to it several times. That at times there are inyanim which we learn, which Chassidus tells us how we are to react. There are times, however, when Chassidus does not mention anything. In the Maimer it is not mentioned, like the case which we are talking about, it is not mentioned that the Avodah from Elul has to be done mitoch Simcha, and it's up to each and every one of us to choose to do the Avodah mitoch Simcha. And on the contrary, when we do this on our own, this is a yet greater achievement, because when we follow instructions, it's one thing. However, when we come to a higher madrege, not only are we following instructions, but we are also in a position of being able to select on our own and add on our own how we are to act in Avodas Hashem. For instance, in the Indian which we are talking now, that we come to a realization that Avodas Hashem has to be metoich Simcha. Here the Simcha is a yet greater one. Why? Because no one told us that we have to be b'Simcha. We have came to this realization on our own, and we have chosen on our own to be b'Simcha. So the schar, the reward for it, is also a greater one. Chassidus is an expression which is often quoted, Nahame de Kisufa. Nahame de Kisufa means bread, unearned bread. In other words, we get bread, but we didn't work for it. So, in other words, when we are told what to do, and it's not something which we achieved on our own, then it fits into the category of Na'ameh de Kisufa. When on our own we choose that the Avodah has to be Metoich Simcha, this is something which the schar, the reward for this, and this type of an accomplishment is a much greater one than when we are doing things that we are following instructions. So here the Rebbe brought out that the fact that the Alter Rebbe does not mention that the Avodah in Elul has to be done Metoich Simcha does not mean to exclude that we don't have to do Metoich Simcha. On the contrary, it's left up to each and every one of us that we should choose, and on our own we should choose and institute the Simcha in the Avodah of Elul. Getting back to the concept how we find various ksavos. In other words, as we explained, things that are from one extreme to another. The Rebbe says we see this in our daily lives as well. In our daily lives we see that the minute a person wakes up, what are the first words that we have to say as soon as we awake in the morning? Moide ani lefanecha. What is the taich? Moide ani. So again, he's feeling and hearing the ani himself, the person. And this ani is reaching to such an extent to lefanecha, to the pnimius of the Rabbeinu Shalom. So it's again tying together two extremes. On one hand, we're talking about the person as the person is standing in a metzias, of feeling his ani, of feeling his metzias, his yeshu metzias, and this ani is extending to whom? To lefanecha, to the Rabbeinu Shalom. Especially, it's brought out in Chassidus that in Moida Ani there is no mention of the Rebbeish's name. That's why we can say it before we even gießen Egel Wasser. But on the other hand, we are reaching to such a level which is lefanecha, into the pnimius of the Rabbeinu Shalom. This same inyan, the Rebbe continues, is reflected on this week's Sedra as well. Sedra begins, Shoftim v'shoitrim titan l'cha b'chol sharach. What is the concept of a shofet? A shofet is a judge. But we're talking about what type of a judge who is powerful, that with his decree, the Rebbe used the expression, Hu amar vayehi. When he says something, it leads that this is exactly what happens. After he has issued his decree is fully fulfilled. So we are tying together the shofet with whom? With the shoiter, who is the policeman. Policeman is an extreme. He is there, the one that the Rebbe mentioned, we'll get to in a minute, the Rebbe tied it into the Rashi. Shoiter, we could teach it the way Rashi teaches, that it means those that are there to enforce the rules of the decrees of the judge. We could also teach shofet, that it means those who are fulfilling the decree. For example, in other words, if the shofet issued a decree that such and such a thing has to be done, this and this person has to be punished in such a way. So the shoiter comes in and he does the punishment which the shofet issued. So again, the shoiter from the shofet is a complete extreme. And what do we say? We are combining shoftim v'shoitrim titan l'cha b'chol sharach. If we go a step further, shoftim and shoitrim, if we were to divide what is the responsibility of the shofet as opposed to the responsibility of the shoiter. The shofet's responsibility primarily is expressed through machshava and dibur, through thought and speech. Whose responsibility is fulfilled through maaseh? It's the responsibility of the shoiter. The shoiter, he has to do the deeds, the actions to fulfill, to see to it that what the shofet has decreed comes into reality. If we are to compare it, we may compare it to Torah and mitzvahs. Torah and mitzvahs reflects the concept of maaseh. HaMaaseh hu ha'ikar is reflected in mitzvahs. However, in Torah, it is machshava and dibur. So the Rebbe raised the question here on this Rashi, talking here on the Rashi, why does Rashi teach that the shoiter means those that are around to see to it that the decree of the judge is fulfilled? What does Rashi say? What does shoiter mean? Shoitrim horoide nesa'om acha mitzvasa shemakim v'koifsin. They are those who strike and bind with a rod or with a lash until one takes upon himself the decision of the judge. Rashi does not teach that it means those who fulfill the decision of the judge. In other words, like we mentioned earlier, we could also teach that a shoiter, the policeman, is there to fulfill the decree of the judge. If the judge said that this and this person has to be punished in such a way, so they are there to whip him, to lash him, or whatever. We don't say that. Why doesn't Rashi learn that way? The Rebbe explained that it seems that Rashi wants to learn how the complete mishpat comes out, what it encompasses within itself. Rashi is learning as far as the psak that the shofet gives. The psak, the decree which the shofet gives, this is what the pasuk here is talking about. So there's the share which the shofet has in it, and there's the share which the shoiter has in it. What is the share of the shoiter? To see to it that everybody follows the instruction. That's why Rashi prefers teaching shoiter this way, as opposed to teach shoiter, the one who goes out as a shliach bezin to do exactly, to fulfill the decree. Because Rashi is eager to teach, to learn it, that it means the complete picture of the decree, and how this is divided between the shofet and the shoiter. In the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also referred, it's interesting that it was all the first sikha. The first sikha was a relative long sikha, and in the first sikha the Rebbe spoke, we just discussed until now, also explained the Rambam, also referred to the L'kutei Levi Yitzchak, and also referred even to the Pirkei Avos, which we recite during the summer months. All of this was all included in the first sikha of the Farbrengen. It's customary, the Rebbe refers to the Rambam, which is learned daily. In the Rambam, it is in the halachas of Tumah. And in these halachas, the Rambam explains the effect of an avodah zarah which became tamei. An avodah zarah which became tamei, and a person touched this avodah zarah, so this carries the tumah to the person as well, and it affects the person. And this type of a tumah is a tumah midivrei soifre, midrabanan. We know that there are tumahs, levels of tumah which are min ha-Torah, and we know that there are levels of tumah which are midrabanan. This tumah, which the Rambam explains these details, Rambam himself tells us that this is a tumah midivrei soifre, it's a tumah midrabanan. However, the Rambam bases this halacha on a pasuk. And bases it on a pasuk which is mentioned in Chumash Bereishis, which is Chumash Bereishis is prior to Matan Torah. So the question arises, why does the Rambam have to rely on a pasuk? I mean, there are many halachas which are medivrei seifrim. And when the Rambam tells us the halacha midarabanan, he does not go back to tell us that we can tie this into a pasuk. If we already tie it to a pasuk, and we relate it to a pasuk, why to a pasuk prior to Matan Torah? B'chlal, we know that all mitzvahs that we do today are mitzvahs, we fulfill these mitzvahs because the Rebbe told us to do so at Matan Torah. There's a famous Rambam, the Pirush HaMishnayis La Rambam, the Rebbe mentions very often, but the Rambam explains that even mitzvahs Milah, which is a mitzvah which was given to Avraham Avinu, and Avraham Avinu was told that he and his children should live up to this mitzvah, should practice this mitzvah. We today fulfill this mitzvah not because it was told to Avraham Avinu prior to Matan Torah. We fulfill it because the Rebbe again said it after Matan Torah. In other words, we do all mitzvahs as a result of Matan Torah. The commitment to mitzvahs for each and every year at all times is related to Matan Torah, and not to things that happened prior to Matan Torah. So the Rambam is mentioning this halacha regarding avodah zarah, and he's looking, and he himself says that this is an avodah, when an avodah zarah becomes tummy. This tummy is a tummy darabanan. Why tie it into a pasuk? And especially if yes, why a pasuk from prior to Matan Torah? So here the Rebbe brought out, what is the concept of avodah zarah? Avodah zarah is a menaged, something which opposes godliness. That's the whole meaning of avodah zarah. So the question arises, why make a metzias? In other words, why give room to avodah zarah and say that when avodah zarah, a person touched an avodah zarah, this should bring tumah to the person, and later this person is not allowed to enter the Beis HaMikdash and he's prohibited to eat karbanos as a result of what? Because of the fact that he touched an avodah zarah. If we're making such halachas, we are giving we're like giving too much attention to Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah is something which we have to ignore. Ignore it totally. Avodah Zarah is a total menaged on godliness, on getlichkeit. That's the whole union of Avodah Zarah. And Memele, if we say that Avodah Zarah can affect halachas on a person, by this in itself, we are giving room and looking up and giving a kind of credibility to Avodah Zarah. In other words, we're allowing that the mitzias of Avodah Zarah should be no mitzias. It should be no substance. This is garnished. If it's garnished, then it shouldn't have any effect on the person that touched it. If it has an effect on the person that touched it, that already means that we're giving it some sort of a consideration. So here the Rebbe brought out, for this reason, the Rambam has to tie it into a pasuk. Being that we find that the Torah gives room for Avodah Zarah. In other words, the Torah. Let's find the halacha now. In other words, when can we say, and how can we say, what gives us the koyach to say that the Avodah Zarah could be metame the person and have an effect on the person, memela, regarding his eating karbanos, regarding his entering the Beis HaMikdash? This is only because we see a makor in Torah, that Torah says so, that how we have to react to Avodah Zarah. If not for the makor in Torah, if not for the source in Torah, then our attitude to Avodah Zarah would be, let's ignore it totally. See that Torah leaves room. Torah tells us what Avodah Zarah is. That Avodah Zarah is a menaged an getlichkeit. But at the same time, we see in Torah that there's room that if Avodah Zarah became tameh, it should affect the person. The halacha is takke mit divrei seifrim. It's takke der Rabbanan dike halacha. But this mit divrei seifrim halacha can only, the Chachamim could have only made this halacha if they have a basis on a pasuk. Let it be even a pasuk from prior to Matan Torah. But as long as there is a basis on a pasuk to rely this halacha. Otherwise, how do we come to say that Avodah Zarah has any effect on the person? Regarding what we call the Chassidische Parsha. The Chassidische Parsha is L'kutei Torah. L'kutei Torah is Mamorim from the Alter Rebbe, and the L'kutei Torah was edited by the Tzemach Tzedek. The Rebbe says that we notice something very interesting. L'kutei Torah is the Mamorim from the Alter Rebbe, edited by the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Chamoshim of Vayikra Bamidbar and Devarim. Notice that on Parsha Shoftim there is no L'kutei Torah, for whatever the reason is, but it's a fact. There is no L'kutei Torah on Parsha Shoftim. The Rebbe says in the writings of the Tzemach Tzedek, see, these Mamorim are Mamorim from the Alter Rebbe, but they were edited and prepared and chosen. In fact, there's at length the writings of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that when the Tzemach Tzedek chose amongst the Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe which Mamorim he should put into the Torah, into the L'kutei Torah, he selected Mamorim from amongst thousands and thousands of Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe, and he selected these Mamorim that for the Chamoshim of Bereishis Shmois for the Torah, and Vayikra Bamidbar Dvarim for the L'kutei Torah. When we learn L'kutei Torah and we have parentheses, the parentheses are notes which were added by the Tzemach Tzedek. Rabbi says that we find in the parentheses, in the notes of the Tzemach Tzedek, that he refers to a maimah in L'kutei Torah Parsha Shoftim. However, we don't have L'kutei Torah Parsha Shoftim, which means that somewhere in writings or in manuscripts there were Mamorim which the Tzemach Tzedek prepared for L'kutei Torah Parsha Shoftim, but the fact we don't have these Mamorim now. For what? Something which requires explanation, but the fact is that the way that L'kutei Torah was prepared to print for Parsha Shoftim, there are no Mamorim. Talking about Shoftim, the Rebbe also mentioned there is an in-depth taich in Shoftim. The Rebbe mentioned it Sunday when he spoke also. Shoftim v'shoitchem titem lecha b'chol sha'arecha, that we had to place judges and policemen at all our entrances. So just like there is the mitzvah in itself, which simply means referring to the judicial system which prevailed when Yidden were in Eretz Yisrael, when we had the Beis HaMikdash. The same way, there's the Olam Kotten Zeha'odam. Every person is considered a small world. And the same way, there are the gates, the openings which we have within a person's body. And primarily it refers to a person's eyes, a person's mouth, and a person's ears. And what are we told? That we are to place judges and policemen at our gates, at our openings. In other words, we ourselves have to control and make decisions what we listen to, what we look at, what we talk. Has to be Shoftim v'sheitrim titin l'chol b'chol sha'arecha at our own gates. There are the gates that are within the gates and openings within the person's body. And it is a person's responsibility to make sure that whatever enters his ears and whatever his eyes look at and whatever comes out of his mouth, everything is suitable and proper according to the desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Farbrengen, the Rebbe also refers to the Zohar with the commentary of his father, Lekutei Levi Yitzchak. Today the Rebbe mentioned that on Parsha Shoftim there is also no Lekutei Levi Yitzchak. Lekutei Levi Yitzchak goes in accordance to Sedris, but on Parsha Shoftim there is no commentary from his father on the Zohar. The Rebbe says we will explain an inyan that has a shaykhs to Parsha Shoftim, which is written by his father in a different Sedr. And this is based on the pasuk Tzedek Tzedek Tirdoif. We shall run after justice, after Tzedek. So the question arises, why is there a double expression in the pasuk? Tzedek Tzedek. Pasuk could have said every word in Chumash is accurate and accounted for. Pasuk could have said Tzedek Tirdoif, run after justice. So in the Zohar there's an explanation. There's a Tzedek de la Eila and there's a Tzedek de la Tata, which means there's a tzedek, an upper righteousness, an upper madrega of righteousness, and then there's a tzedek which deals with a lower madrega of righteousness. The Rebbe says, what does this mean in the V'achai Yitin Elibai, in the lesson which we can derive from all of this? What does this mean? The Rebbe says, we all know that it is our obligation to do chesed. To do chesed, which means to extend help to a fellow Jew. However, at times we will say that the help which we feel we can give, I like to help, but whom will I help? I will help a person who is my equal. However, if there is a person who is la'ela, he's higher than I am, he's greater than I am, I don't feel myself close enough to get involved into that person and go ahead and extend a favor to him. I don't feel that close, I don't feel that friendly. That person is a la'ela man, he's higher than I am. How can I come to that person and do tzedek to him? Or at times we can have the same approach, the same calculation, the opposite way. There is a latata. There is a person who we look at that he's lower than we are. Memela, we will say, chesed, sure, I like to help, I like to do favors, and I'm obligated to do favors, but again, to whom? To a person who's my equal. That person who is so much lower than I am, how can you expect from me to get involved and extend my hand to that person and help such a person as well? It's below my dignity. It's past diminished. So this is the expression in the pasuk Tzedek Tzedek Tirdoif, which stresses there's a Tzedek de l'Eila and there's a Tzedek de l'Tata. Whether it's a person who is your equal, or it's a person who you look at that he's lower than you, or a person who may be higher than you and you feel kind of a distance between yourself and that person. What are we told? Tzedek Tzedek Tirdoif. We always have to run after tzedek, after righteousness. The Rebbe also referred to the Pirkei Avos, which we say today, and that is the 6th Perek, which begins Shanu Chachamim B'Lshein HaMishnah. Now we know that this 6th Perek, this is really not part of Pirkei Avos. This is a Baraisa which is called Kinyan Torah, which means how we acquire Torah, how we gain Torah. And if we look into the contents of the Perek, we will see that this is what is discussed. How we gain Torah, how we acquire Torah. So here again the Rebbe brings out, we again have a combination of two extremes. How does it begin? Shanu Chachamim B'Lshein HaMishnah. The Chachamim have learned. Who are these Chachamim? This is a Beraisa. We know there is Mishnah and there is Beraisa. This is a Beraisa. This is not part of Mishnah. It's a Beraisa. However, the Chachamim of Beraisa have edited this Mishnah Bilshain HaMishnah, as if it would be a Mishnah. So it's again a combination of two extremes. We know that there's the system of Baraisa and there's the system of Mishnah. Here we say, Shonu Chachamim, the Chachamim have learned a Baraisa. How did they learn this Baraisa? Bilshain HaMishnah. And again, here also the Rebbe kept on stressing how we find in this Mishnah, Kolma, how does Perek Vav conclude? The sixth Perek concludes with the words, everything which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created in this world, He created only in His honor. What does this mean? That everything in this world, normally we know that a Yid is commanded, we have mitzvahs. We have 613 mitzvahs, which are divided into positive mitzvahs, mitzvahs asay, mitzvahs lois asay, 248 mitzvahs asay, 365 mitzvahs lois asay. Here comes the Mishnah, says this is not enough. Everything which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created in this world is created only to honor Him. The Mela, which brings out the concept of the Chol Drochecha Da'ehu, Kol Masecha L'Shem Shemayim, and all your ways thou shalt know Him. Everything, all your ma'asim, again, all your ma'asim, all our gash, everything which we come into contact into this world has to be tied in with Kedusha. Kol Ma'ashabah HaKadosh Baruch Hu Beilam was created only to His honor. Therefore, whenever we come into contact, into direct dealing with anything which is created in this world, we have to utilize it and upgrade it that it should be l'chvaydet. So it's more than the 613 mitzvahs. This is actually the concept that in everything that we do, v'chol drachecha, in all thy ways, da'eyu, we have to know Him and refer to Him, to the Rabbeinu Shalom. From Parshas Shoftim, we are entering Parshas Kiseitzei. Here the Rebbe stressed, what is the taich of Kiseitzei? Pasuk says, Kiseitzei la melchama alavecha. If you go out into war with your enemies, when Sonei Hashem Elokecha biyadecha, you should know that the Rebishter will give your enemy into your hands. So, what is the pasuk? Vishavisa shivyoy. And you will capture a captive. This is the first pasuk of Parshas Kiseitzei. What it says, here we find the approach of a Yid to the war. What kind of war are we talking about? We are all constantly in a war and a battle. And the battle is what? With the Yetzer Hara, who's interfering in our Avodas Hashem. So what are we told? You should know, Kiseitzei la milchama. When you're going out into war, you should know Aloi Vecha. The pasuk doesn't say you're going into a war Imoi Vecha, with your enemy. The pasuk says Aloi Vecha. What does Aloi Vecha mean? On top of your enemy. We should know right away. What should our approach be? We should go right away with a feeling that we are Aloi Vecha. We are on top, and that's why we will succeed. We will overcome him. Why? Because it's Aloi Vecha. This is what the Torah tells us. We right away take for granted that on Sonei Hashem Elokecha biyadecha, we know that we take have a war, we take have a battle. I don't know if the Rebbe mentioned it today, or he mentioned it recently in the Farbrengen, that when a person has a war, in other words, there are things that are against him, and he's fighting his battle, this is creating within the person much deeper koiches than if he wouldn't have anyone fighting him. On the contrary, this is bringing out much deeper koiches. So we know we have a war, there's a battle, there's a constant battle that's interfering with our Avodas Hashem. What are we told? We know that we will overcome him, we will go Aloi Vecha, and we know that on the Sonei Hashem Elokecha biyadecha, that the Rebishter will give it to our hands. Vishavisa shivyoy. The Rebbe asked, the expression, the pasuk should have been, Vishavisa, you will capture, Shevi, somebody who is a captive. What's meant Shivyoy? Shivyoy means his captive. Was meint das? What does this mean? So as it's explained in Chassidus, everybody has their avodas habirurim, which means the avodah which we all have, everybody has his share, where he has to purify and be mevarer and then bring into getlichkeit. There are nitzutzes, there are sparks of getlichkeit, which are intermingled in this world all over, and everybody has to reach out to these sparks and make sure that these sparks are purified again and are returned to its source, which is getlichkeit. However, every yid has his birurim. There are the birurim which one has to do. There are the birurim which another person has to do. So what are we told here? Vishavisa shiviyoi. It's not stam I'm capturing a captive. What ultimately happens is that this captive that I am capturing, this is shiviyoi. This is my birurim. In other words, this is my avodah, my sparks of godliness, which I have to do in this world, and it's coming my way. And the same to every person. It's his sparks which are of getlichkeit, which are assigned to him. And going through this milchama, going through this battle, he gains access of these nitzutzei elokis, these sparks of getlichkeit that have been traveling all over the world, and by gaining control of them and bringing them back to its source, everyone is fulfilling his vishavisa shiviyai, his avodas habirurim that has a shaykhus to him. The Rebbe again urged the Farbrengen that being that we are at the end of the year, everybody should still make sure that we utilize the remainder of the year for Shnas Tismach and Shnas Tesamach, happiness to ourselves, bringing happiness to others, as well as the union of Hakel. The Rebbe also urged, we have spoken about a while ago, but the Rebbe has brought out how each and every one of us is to make our private homes, that our private home should be suitable for a dwelling of godliness. Every home is a mini Beis HaMikdash, just like the whole idea of the Beis HaMikdash was that godliness, that the Shechina should dwell there. The Beis HaMikdash was a keli for the Shechina. The same thing, when the Pasuk commands us on making a Mishkan, the Pasuk uses the expression V'asuli Mishkan V'shachamti, and I will dwell b'soicham amongst them. So we all know the famous question. Pasuk should have used the expression V'shachanti b'soichoi, that the Rebbeinu will dwell in it, in the Mishkan, not amongst them, plural. So interpretation is that b'soich kol echad ve'echad, amongst every person, within every person, there is room for the Rebbeinu to dwell, and every Jewish home can be a Mishkan for the Rebbeinu. Every Jewish home has to be every child's room, and every area in a home can be prepared that it should be suitable for the Shechina, for godliness to dwell in that home. The Rebbe again urged today, reminded us again on this concept, and for those that it haven't reached to as yet, to make sure that it reaches them and so forth. The Rebbe says that this week camps will be returning home. Children who spent the summer months basada, and now they will coming back home. So Mamela, it's again in a proper time, he spoke over again the Indian of Kiseitze la Melcham Alei Vecha, to make sure that every child and counselors and staff members are all aware of this concept that we are constantly in a battle, we are in a Melchama, but we should know that in the Melchama the Rebbeinu has given us koiches that we can be Alei Vecha, we can be on top of our enemies, we will overcome our enemies, we will overcome our problems. But brought out that when children will be coming back from camp, hopes that all the good that the children have picked up in camp, they will carry with them and bring it with them to their homes and bring it into day-to-day practice and live with it throughout the entire year. Rabbi also urged, he says, now is the time. We are already a week in Elul. He says it's such a week. It's Zion Elul. In other words, we have a complete week in Elul. Every day of the week, we already had a day in Elul. We had a Sunday, we had a Monday, we had every day in Elul. And it's already also time to prepare for Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah, we know, and on Rosh Hashanah we are told, Ichlu, Mashmanim, Shtumam Takim, to be able to enjoy proper meals on Rosh Hashanah. Real delicious meals, real suitable Yontif Dika meals. So the Rebbe urged that we see to it that all Yidden be in a position that they all be able to celebrate Rosh Hashanah properly, and everybody should have all their means, so they should really be able to have a proper and enjoyable Rosh Hashanah. And the Rebbe concluded with a Ksiva Vachsima Toiva, L'Shana Toiva Mesuka, wish for a happy and healthy year, a sweet year, Begashmiyas or Beruchniyas, and Beruchniyas or Begashmiyas, Lamata Ma'asor Atfachim, to each and every one of us.